Boys, the Vikings quarterback situation has both changed and not changed since the ending of the NFL Combine over the weekend. So let's jump right into this, all the different machinations that have been news stories and speculation that has come out over the past week or so. Adam Schefter saying that, or after it came out that the Vikings were not going to tag Sam Darnold, now leaving it open to other teams possibly signing Sam Darnold and the Vikings moving on to the J.J. McCarthy era. Adam Schefter came out saying that, and a couple other insiders as well have come out saying that a reunion is still possible for the Vikings. So, Will, let's get your take on this. I think what's changed for you since the combine, if anything, in your thinking of what the Vikings will do at quarterback this offseason?
Yeah, it hasn't changed much on my end, but I'm glad we're talking about this because it's been really fascinating to me, the kind of insider push since the news
Mm-hmm.
that the Vikings aren't going to be tagging Darnold. This push that they're not done with Darnold, like they still want him back. The Vikings and Darnold are still working on exploring ways for him to remain in Minnesota, and all these it's Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and Jordan Schultz and all these different people are really pushing this idea, and it just makes me wonder: is that really what's happening? Is that coming from somewhere, from Darnold's camp, from the Vikings camp, for whatever narrative reasons, or trying to create a market, or whatever it may be? And on my end, I remain of the belief that Sam Darnold is not going to be back in Minnesota next year. It just doesn't really make sense to me because they've got JJ McCarthy waiting in the wings, who Kevin O'Connell, it was the big reason why they took him 10th overall. They loved what they saw from him last offseason and in the one preseason game before he got hurt. And by all accounts, he's doing well in his injury recovery. And then there's this whole idea that, oh, he's a rookie quarterback's never missed their whole first season with an injury before. Oh, we can't. I mean, teams play rookies without having ever played in the NFL all the time. At some point, you got to let the guy go. So I don't think it's much more of a risk than just any team playing a rookie quarterback who has no experience. They have to get it somehow. And McCarthy has the benefit of having a whole year in the Vikings offense, doing everything except playing, learning all of the schemes and taking mental reps and the VR and all that stuff. And so I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I don't see how it makes sense for Sam Darnold to be back. The awkwardness that would present if he loses a competition to JJ McCarthy, or if he starts right away and then struggles early in the season and the fans are all clamoring for McCarthy. And it just doesn't seem to make sense for the Vikings, who have a lot of other needs at other positions. Doesn't really seem to make sense for Darnold, who is coming off this incredible Pro Bowl season. He's 27 years old. Go somewhere where there isn't a JJ McCarthy waiting in the wings, you know? Like, I understand maybe the appeal of wanting to stick around with Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson, but I just don't see a world where Darnold is the starter any longer than at least the 2025 season, and maybe not even the entire 2025 season. So it doesn't make sense to me unless his market just really isn't there for whatever reason, and he's going to come back on like a 1 year 20-25 million deal, which just would be shocking to me based on his age, his draft pedigree, and what he put on tape last season. So I still don't see it happening, but this is a fascinating situation.
I mean, I don't know if it doesn't make sense for the Vikings. I think it does make sense for the Vikings in terms of, what you got out of Darnold last year. It's hard to just let that walk out the door for nothing. And you don't want to spend the franchise tag money. I definitely understand that. But if they're looking at some way they can get him back on like a $30 million a year kind of deal, which I don't think they will, because there's probably somebody who's going to go out and shell out big money for him. I think they're going to do that because you don't really know what you have in JJ McCarthy yet. Obviously, there's no way to know what you have till he gets out there, but he's coming off the injury. He's young. It's not unprecedented for even first round quarterbacks to sit for a while behind somebody who's got more experience, more veteran quarterback. And I think they're kind of just approaching this the same way they did with Kirk Cousins, where I think they would have brought Kirk Cousins back last year, and we wouldn't have even had Sam Darnold in the first place had they been able to come to terms on some kind of like, you know, shorter 2 year, 3 year, maybe even deal for like 30 million ish a year versus the bag he got over in Atlanta. So I think it's probably going to be a similar situation to that, and that's probably how they're approaching this. Is they'd like to have him back because I mean he played great. It's hard to just let a guy like that walk. So you're going to try to come to terms on a deal, probably a shorter term kind of deal that you like and gives you that flexibility to move McCarthy in at some point. But I don't see, with the sheer lack of quarterback options and the teams that really are desperate for quarterbacks, somebody's going to overpay him, and it's not going to be the Vikings. But I think it would make sense for them to try and get him back on a reasonable deal that's not going to eat all their cap, even with the other holes to fill, just because it's hard to let a guy like that walk. And what could he do in year two after kind of jumping in one year and learning the offense and all that? And there's definitely you can't feel like he's hit a ceiling just in this one year, right? So I think there's a lot of things that would make sense for him to come back, but at a price point, and I just don't think the Vikings are going to find that price point.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
agree with that. I definitely agree with that to an extent. Like I shouldn't say that it doesn't make sense for the Vikings to have interest in bringing Darnold back with the season that he had. I just think that there's concerns about the way that the last two games went and the way that he kind of melted in those moments. And there's Kevin O'Connell's track record of being able to elevate quarterbacks. And he did it with Sam Darnold. He did it with late career Kirk Cousins. He did it with Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins at times. And I think that is a big reason why they drafted JJ McCarthy, and they've planned to build around this rookie contract because of their belief in what Kevin O'Connell can help him become. And I just think that now is the time to move into that era and to start JJ McCarthy and to maybe, I mean, you need some sort of other plan, but I think Daniel Jones at 10 million or a little more, or even Jimmy Garoppolo or Carson Wentz or some of these guys like
Jameis
that
Winston,
who are more clear backup options. You say Jameis Winston?
Jameis Winston,
uh,
get him here.
these guys make more sense than, I mean, it'd be at least 20, 25 million to bring Darnold back, if not 30. And I just, that runs the risk of him becoming this really expensive backup and the dynamics becoming weird. And I don't think you should hand anything to JJ McCarthy, but I also think he proved a good amount prior to the injury last year. And so for as great of a season as Sam Darnold had, I just think it's time for the Vikings to go to McCarthy and use the cap space to really invest in the roster around the rookie quarterback, or the rookie quarterback contract, at least. Um, and we'll see. And I do agree then ultimately with your point that even if they do have interest in bringing Sam Darnold back, I still think there's going to be a team out there, even if weirdly it seems like the market hasn't been crazy for Darnold. I think there's going to be one of these quarterback needy teams that is surveying the options and decides to give Darnold 35, 40 million a year.
We'll get to the discussion of like who that team could be a little later on, but I want to go back to a topic you guys have kind of hit on here. How much should the way those last two games against the Lions and the Rams and how bad it looked, how much should that weigh on what we think and what the market should be for Darnold? Because we saw 15 games before that, he was outstanding. I mean, sure there was ups and downs, but for the most part, we were talking about, especially after that those Packers and Falcons games, we were talking about they could bring this guy back and take another step, and this guy could be the real deal. This could be the real Sam Darnold. And then all of a sudden, 2 games at the end of the season, and I know it's what have you done for me lately, but those 2 games at the end of the season were just 2 games as opposed to the 15, 16 before that. And yet we all talk about, and you kind of did you mentioned it as well, Will. We all talk about JJ McCarthy showing out in what, 2, 3 quarters in that first preseason game. And and I'm guilty of this too, of we all just expect that to be the JJ McCarthy. And hey, he showed out in that one game, and yet we're not willing to give Sam Darnold the benefit of the doubt for 15, 16 games of good performances. How much should those 2 games weigh on what we think and how the wider NFL world talks about Sam Darnold, Will?
Yeah, I mean it has to be a factor to some degree. You shouldn't.
Yes.
Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah said it in his kind of recent press conference that you don't want to overweight it,
Mm-hmm.
but you also don't want to underweight it. And I think that's the best way to look at it is you have to just kind of treat it for what it is. There was 2 games. it was also the two biggest games of the season, with the
Yes.
lights shining the brightest, the stakes being the highest. That does not by any means negate all of the great things that Sam Darnold did over 16 games prior to that. But it matters to a degree. And your point on McCarthy is true. It's that was one preseason game from him, and some training camp practices and whatnot. But you also have the college tape to go back to, that the Vikings liked enough to draft him 10th overall. So it's part of the kind of the full evaluation of both McCarthy and then Darnold, who going back to his previous stops at San Francisco, Carolina, New York, like it's all part of the picture here. Um, but no, I don't think that you should put too much weight on the two games. But I also don't think they're meaningless either. I think that these are all things that the Vikings have been considering this offseason, and that other teams interested in perhaps signing Sam Darnold have been looking into as well.
When we talk about Sam Darnold, Nolan, is there, and when we talk about him, we put him in this conversation of the Baker Mayfields, the Geno Smiths of the world that got off to bad starts in their career and have rebounded and have found landing spots with new teams, successful landing spots at that. But the thing is, those two guys, there's been a clear ceiling. They haven't been able to take their teams far in the playoffs. Is that something that we should be considering if Sam Darnold does come back? Is that there just might be a ceiling that he might not be a quarterback that can make a deep playoff run based on some of these other guys who have had similar career turnarounds?
Yeah, I think that is always something to consider. I think also something to like Baker. I know people put Baker in that conversation. I don't think he was ever bad. I think he was on the Cleveland Browns. Yeah, he wasn't as great, but like he wasn't even really that bad in Cleveland compared
Yeah.
to like where Geno Smith and Sam Darnold were. So I think his is a little bit of a different story too. And like even them being able to get the playoffs this year, there was like a good stretch where he had no Mike Evans and Godwin, and they somehow, with K Dot and his wide receiver one, apparently he still managed to win enough games to get him in there. But I think it is also something you can't put too much stock into because it's a team game, right? As far as like there are quarterbacks who can clearly elevate you. You have your Patrick Mahomes, who is in the Super Bowl year after year after year, but there's not too many of those kind of guys. It's a team game, and I think a lot of the team around is going to matter. I think in this case, you have a pretty good roster around, and I think like looking at those, like the playoff game in particular, and then that game against the Lions at the end of the year, I think some of the things you can't take too much stock in, as far as like any team that's getting killed, the offensive line's getting killed by those like good interior defensive linemen who can rush, does not do too well. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, the Super Bowls he's lost, it's because there's been a lot of pressure that he just has not been able to handle, and no quarterback can at a certain point. I think Darnold does have a tendency to hold onto the ball too, but we've talked about the Vikings' interior offensive line being a need. That's something they're probably going to be going after in free agency, maybe the draft. Um, Something like that can even help a quarterback. And then too, I think even like the playoff game, I think as good as Kevin O'Connell's been here, and doesn't get a ton of criticism, there was not a lot of like quick, short passes to try to negate that pressure either. And then you already have a quarterback who likes to hold on to the ball, and it just kind of all led into disaster. So I think you can't put that much stock as like because he lost that games against the Rams, does that mean he doesn't have a playoff run in him? I don't think so. I think it's possible, but I think I'd probably look at more as like the whole career, right? Is like maybe this was more of a flash in the pan. It's hard to tell if it's like a real resurgence, or was he just with good coaching with Justin Jefferson, a good running back, just a really good all around roster. Um, and would he be able to do that, replicate that same kind of thing on a team like if he ends up with the Raiders who don't have that talent around him? It could be a different story, but I don't think you can write off somebody because they've had this career path, that there's no deep playoff run in him. In theory, I think he could do it if he can maintain the level he was at this last year.
Will, how much of the speculation, I guess, in the last couple days of a possible reunion for Sam Darnold might just be Kevin O'Connell wanting some continuity at that quarterback position? Because he had 17 games of first season of Kirk Cousins, at eight games before he lost Kirk Cousins for the season in 2020. 3. And we saw how Cousins was playing in that first half of the season. People were talking about him in the MVP conversation because he was playing so well. And then he lost him, and then there's been a plethora of different quarterbacks over the last year and a half. How much of this could just be Kevin O'Connell wanting some continuity at that quarterback position for probably the first time since he took over as head coach of the Vikings?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think there's definitely a part of Kevin O'Connell that would like to have Sam Darnold back because you saw the clear evidence of what he's capable of doing in this offense. 4,300 yards, 35 touchdowns, finished 10th in MVP voting. Like he had a very, very good season. So the evidence is there that that is possible. And yes, something that Nolan's brought up, like that was Kirk Cousins. The 2023 Kirk Cousins was year 2 in Kevin O'Connell's
Mm-hmm.
offense. Like perhaps year 2 for Sam Darnold in this offense could look even better. But at the same time, I think Kevin O'Connell really, 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 really likes JJ McCarthy and what he saw from JJ McCarthy and is confident that JJ McCarthy can maybe not replicate that season right away by any means. I think there will be some growing pains, but can be that kind of quarterback down the line for the Vikings. So I mean, O'Connell said that he's watched that game against the Rams over and over and over again. And that game, to be clear, was not all Sam Darnold's fault. The Vikings' offensive line was horrible. They got killed. Darnold didn't have much of a chance. He wasn't good himself, but I think Kevin O'Connell, as more than just the quarterback guru, as the head coach and really the CEO of the Vikings from a football standpoint, he understands that they need to get better at areas beyond quarterback. They need to upgrade the offensive line. They need to do things on the defensive side of the ball to get better. So you can, if you can bring Sam Darnold back and restructure some guys and create more cap space, they've got enough space to make additions, even if Sam Darnold were to be back. But if he isn't, and it's JJ McCarthy and Daniel Jones or whoever else, that's just even more space to really hammer those positions of need: the interior offensive line, the interior defensive line, cornerback, running back, whatever it may be. Which is part of the reason why I think that O'Connell, even if pure quarterback standpoint, really loves Sam Darnold and a lot of the things that he did, I think he's going to ultimately be okay if what I expect to happen happens, which is Sam Darnold playing somewhere else next year.
For sure. As we move on in this conversation of the Vikings quarterback situation, where do we expect, if it's not going to be here, like some of the insiders have been speculating and suggesting could happen, if it's not going to be in Minnesota, where are the likely destinations for Sam Darnold? Now that we've seen the Rams are off the board since they're sticking with Matthew Stafford, who are the likely where are the likely spots for Sam Darnold this offseason? Nolan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's the quarterback list teams right now. You got the Raiders, the two New York teams seem like a possibility. A Jets reunion would be pretty funny after all this. But it's on, it's a not that like unrealistic of a possibility. Seems like those could be some teams. I think I'm missing somebody else, but those seem to be the
There's
ones most floated.
there's Pittsburgh is another one.
Is
Pittsburgh,
Pittsburgh the
yeah.
favorite? Pittsburgh seems like the smartest spot for him to go if he's a quarterback looking at and realizing, hey, the situation around me has to be good. What better spot other than Minnesota, obviously, would he go to other than Pittsburgh? Because that's a stable organization with a really good head coach that has just been dying for at least a good quarterback for the last handful of years, even into the latter portions of Ben Roethlisberger's career. They've been dying for someone who can actually be a good quarterback there. That seems to me to be the organization and landing spot that is probably the best for Sam Darnold this offseason.
Pittsburgh
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
if he's looking for like organizational stability, Pittsburgh is head and heels above the Giants, the Jets, the Raiders. I think the Raiders will be appealing in part because they're trying to not be the Raiders of old anymore. I mean, you got Tom Brady in the ownership group, John Spytek, GM, Pete Carroll is the head coach. Like
I think
great
Pete Carroll could
stadium.
be a really good selling point because you saw what
Yeah,
he was able to do with Geno Smith.
100%. They got an indoor stadium. So
Just a
that would
tough
be one.
conference or
Yeah,
division.
it's a tough division for sure. That would be one where that would interest me more if I'm Sam Darnold than playing for either of the teams at MetLife Stadium. I don't think he's going to go back to the Jets.
No, you can't
I
walk back
just
into that stadium.
Giants maybe, but even
Mm-mm.
that, like they are such a mess. And then the other two I think to keep in mind would be the top two picks in the draft are the Titans and the Browns. Now they could certainly, if they like Cam Ward and or Shadur Sanders enough, they could that could be their plan at quarterback, but they could also very much be in the Darnold mix, and then you take an Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter or something instead of a quarterback, especially with I think the opinions are pretty varied on these two quarterbacks this year. So there could be other spots too. I saw like somebody floated Indy, which I don't know if they're
I'm
giving
not
up
sold
on
on Anthony. Yeah,
on Anthony Richardson just yet, but um, there's at least 5 or 6 teams who very much need a new quarterback, and Sam Darnold is, by all accounts, the best option out there.
last question on Darnold. Are you guys surprised by the way the conversation has evolved around Sam Darnold this offseason? That it seems like, according to reports, the market is kind of dried up on Sam Darnold, and he might have to take a little bit less than the 35-40 million he was projected to in the middle of the season when he was playing at his hottest. Are you surprised that apparently those last 2 games have had as big of an impact on his potential market as it has, Will?
I am a little bit surprised, frankly. I mean, if nobody is willing to give Sam Darnold a 35 or $40 million a year contract, that would just kind of go against everything we've seen from the NFL recently, and these
Yeah.
teams giving out these big quarterback contracts. I mean, the Giants gave Daniel Jones $40 million a year. The Packers gave Jordan Love a huge contract. Deshaun Watson, like all of these different quarterbacks, the teams are. It's such an important position in the sport that teams are really not shy about paying what you have to pay to try to get a guy who can win you games at that position. And Sam Darnold, I think that the hesitancies, if I'm trying to put myself in other teams' shoes, would be no real track record of sustained success prior to last season. Can he replicate it outside of the Vikings environment where he doesn't have Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson and all of these other pieces? But he's 27 years old. He's a former top 5 pick with an absolute cannon of a right arm. He's got mobility. He just came off of being a top 5, top 6 quarterback in a lot of metrics, passer rating, yards, touchdowns, all of these things. It would be surprising to me if there's no team out there. Maybe it's not 40 million a year, but at least 35. Like if this is where if teams are just drawing a line in the sand and saying, "Oh, these other big quarterback contracts haven't worked out for people," which fair, but it would be a weird that now would be the time for them to all kind of come to that conclusion. So I am a little surprised, and we'll see. I still think he might get a pretty decently sized contract from somebody else next week.
Nolan, are you surprised?
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty surprised for a couple of reasons. Like Will saying, like you've seen these big quarterback contracts. I had to look it up just now because we talked about Daniel Jones with his 40 million a year. That came after a year he threw for 3,200 yards, 15 touchdowns. He didn't turn it over, he only had 5 picks. But Darnold over 1,000 more yards. I think it was 35 touchdown passes, 20 more touchdowns, and is going to pay him 35, 40 million. I can't imagine that happens. I still think somebody will, but it does seem pretty surprising that there just does not seem to be that much urgency here from teams, especially because there's a lot of teams in need of a quarterback. The free agent quarterback class is awful, and the draft class is not good. Besides the 2 guys Will mentioned, Shadur Sanders and Cam Ward, those are the only 2 guys who anybody thinks are really like starting potential in the draft here. So it's like you got a weak quarterback draft, you got a weak quarterback free agency. Sam Darnold came off a fantastic season and is 27, and nobody's going to pay him. I just
Yeah,
can't imagine that that's going to happen.
if
But
these teams don't go get Sam Darnold, what are you doing? Are you signing 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers? Are you
what
going
are you
Justin
paying him?
Fields, Russell Wilson? Like it doesn't. I don't know. I just think that the demand is going to ultimately lead some team to pay Sam Darnold, and I'll be surprised if it doesn't happen.
Yeah, we'll find out 3 p.m. Central Time, March 12th, so next Wednesday. I mean, we'll
Well, I
find
think
out
we'll find
before that.
out.
Yeah,
We
we'll
might,
find out
might find
before
out
that.
on Monday when the legal tampering period opens. Last year, Kirk Cousins Falcons deal was done by Monday afternoon. So
Sunday, you mean? Excuse me.
yeah, true. Well before that,
Yeah,
if you
well
ask.
before the legal tampering period happened
You
or
ask Mike
was
Florio.
opened. I said we were trying to avoid that name on the show today. Other Vikings news coming out today. Theo Jackson signing a 2-year, $12.615 million extension. Kind of took us a little bit by surprise, I'd say. It's a lot of money for a guy who hasn't started a whole lot. Is this a clear sign that Cam Bynum's probably gone this offseason, that they're not going to invest that kind of money that he's going to get this offseason into Cam Bynum because there are so many other needs elsewhere across the roster, Will?
I think it is. Yeah, I think. I mean, we've known for a while how much the Vikings like Theo
Mm-hmm.
Jackson. He's been kind of biding his time in a really good safety room behind the scenes, behind the Bynum, Harrison Smith, Josh Metellus trio, and then he's played well when he's gotten his opportunities. He has a couple interceptions. And he's only played a little over 200 defensive snaps, but been a really good special teams guy. I kind of just expected them to tender him as a restricted free agent, but now that it's happened, I'm not really surprised that they went this route. It's basically like a 3-year, $15 million extension with 2 years guaranteed because you got the tender in there and then 2 years beyond this year. So it's like they're replicating what they did with Josh Metellus before the 2023 season when they signed him to it's like a 2-year, 12 or 13 million extension. And then Metellus had his huge breakout year, and that's become a really good contract that might have to get adjusted soon. But they're trying to do that again with Jackson, who I think they see Metellus like potential as a guy who can do a lot of different things. He can line up all over the place in Brian Flores' defense, in the slot, the box, deep safety. He can blitz, he can tackle, he can play in coverage. Like they really like him, and I do think that this means that he is more likely than not going to be a starter this year, whether or not Harrison Smith comes back, and that Cam Bynum, who the Vikings also really like, to be clear, and is a good player, much more proven than Jackson, much more playing experience, and also great celebrations. I just think he may end up getting a contract from another team that the Vikings didn't really want to match, knowing that they had Jackson in-house ready to go. So I do think that Bynum is probably gone next year.
Nolan, have we seen the last of Cam Bynum in a purple jersey?
I hope not. I mean, like Will said with the celebrations, like vibe loss alone is going to be a huge blow if Bynum's gone. But I mean, it does probably seem like that with this contract, unless it is like they got word Harrison Smith is hanging up the cleats or something, and then they feel like Theo can step in there and then they can bring back Bynum. But I don't. It seems like they would not pay him that kind of money if they were going to also extend Bynum to what is expected to be probably a pretty sizable contract.
All right. The final question here, as we get closer to the legal tampering period opening next Monday, give me your expectation, just off the wall. I don't care if there's reporting on it or not. Give me your expectation and your prediction for who the first free agent the Vikings will sign coming up this free agency. Will, I'll start with you then, Nolan.
The first one.
The
So
first one.
not the biggest one, but
Not
just
the
the
biggest one,
first
just first one.
I don't remember who the first one was last year. 2 years ago, it was Josh Oliver, which was kind of surprising. I was like, they're signing another tight end, but that it worked out pretty well. I will say Will Fries, the Colts guard. I think the Vikings are going to make a big push to sign him. He is a guy who was having a really strong kind of breakout fourth season last year, and then he fractured his tibia in week 5 and was out for the rest of the year. But he's a mauler. He is physicality, mobility, nastiness. I do think there's going to be real interest in his services. He's not going to be cheap, but the Bears are out of that market. They just traded for Jonah Jackson and Joe Tooney this week, so they're good at guard. I think the Vikings, with their cap space, with their need, will make a real push to get that done with Will Fries, and that's just me guessing here.
Yeah.
But I could see that being maybe not the first move, but I think they will really try to get one of these guards, and Fries just makes a lot of sense for them.
Bears certainly making Vikings fans jealous with those moves, getting some really good guards via the trade market.
Yeah, that's what happens when it's what you can do when you have more than 4 draft picks to your name.
Shocking. All right, Nolan, your prediction.
I think they'll probably try to secondary somewhere cornerback. Maybe like a DJ Reed. That would be a exciting name anyway. I think they'll probably look to add a cornerback. I think they'll probably will try to bring Murphy back here, but then you've got a lot of guys leaving. Shaq Griffin and man, I'm blanking who might retire.
Stephon Gilmore.
Gilmore. Yeah,
Yeah.
Gilmore might retire. So you're definitely going to need to um, strengthen up that cornerback room. So I think they'll probably look for somebody like that on the market. And I guess that would be one of their early signings.
Yeah, looking forward.
DJ Reed, really good. Carlton Davis would be another one. And I will say that with this Jackson news making it seem like Cameron Bynum is gone, I almost wonder if that like somehow increases the chances that they really, really try to make sure Byron Murphy is back here. Because for me, it's kind of always been like you're going to do a big deal for either Bynum or Murphy, and probably not both.
Yeah.
So I think they try to get Murphy back, but then you'll want to add an additional cornerback or two as well.
Yeah, and we know how much this ownership group likes to retain and keep its in-house talent. So good points there from you guys. Good stuff from you today. Appreciate it. Go read all their work over on Vikings on SI, as well as Timberwolves, Twins, and Gophers on SI, covering it all for you. Be sure to hit subscribe on the YouTube channel here. It does help us get found. Also notifies you every time we post a new video here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. We'll talk to you tomorrow with another topic across Minnesota sports fan. Talk to you then.